My mother kicked me out at 16 to keep her twins. Years later, she comes back demanding money. But I got a restraining order and she ended up in jail for violating it. I'm 31 years old, work in real estate, and honestly, I need to get this off my chest because what happened with my mom basically destroyed me in a way I'm still processing, you know, even after all these years. The thing is, my mom had me when she was 20. My biological father abandoned us before I turned 1. Never met him. Honestly. And I don't care to either. So basically, I grew up in a single-parent household but surrounded by love because my grandparents were always there. You know what I mean? My mom worked a lot, like 2 jobs sometimes, and my grandparents took care of me when she couldn't. They helped me with homework, took me to the park, all those things. We weren't rich or anything like that, but the truth is I never lacked anything important. We had a normal life and I was happy, I guess. I had no complaints about anything at that time. When I was like 8 years old, I think, or maybe a bit older, I don't remember exactly, my mom started dating Brian. Brian seemed like a decent guy at first. He worked in construction, had his own small business, and he was nice to me. He took me to play soccer on weekends and bought me ice cream. Normal things adults do to win you over when they're dating your mom. They got married when I was 12, and at first everything was fine. I mean, he wasn't my dad or anything, but he wasn't bad to me either. Let's say we had a cordial relationship, nothing special but functional. We kept living in the same house where my mom and I had always lived. Brian moved in with us. And my grandparents were still an important part of my life because they lived like 10 minutes away, and I saw them almost every day after school. Things started to change when I was 16. And when I say change, I mean my life literally went to hell overnight. My mom got pregnant with twins, and I was honestly excited at first because, I don't know, the idea of having little siblings sounded cool. I thought I was going to be like the protective older brother and all those fantasies you make up when you're a teenager and don't understand how the real world works. But turns out my mom and Brian had other plans that didn't include me at all. One day, like 3 months before the twins were born, my mom sat me down in the living room and said, "We need to talk." And I thought it was going to be one of those awkward conversations about how the family dynamic was going to change or something like that. But no. What came out of her mouth was basically a death sentence for my life as I knew it, she told me, looking me straight in the eyes without the slightest hint of doubt or regret. That Brian and her had been talking and had come to the conclusion that they couldn't support 3 kids with their current income, that the twins were going to need a lot of things, and that I was basically already an adult. I was 16 years old. Just to be clear, 16. So they had decided that it was best for me to go live with my grandparents. And when I say, she told me just like that, out of the blue, without any preparation or anything. I mean it literally. It was like, you have 2 weeks to pack your things and move out. I sat there unable to process what I was hearing. Like, is this really happening? Is my own mother kicking me out of the house to make room for her new kids? Brian was standing there in the kitchen. I could see him out of the corner of my eye, and he said absolutely nothing. Just stood there with his arms crossed, like backing up every word that came out of my mom's mouth. I tried to reason with her, told her I could get a part-time job to help with expenses, that I didn't need much space, that I could sleep on the couch if necessary. Basically, I begged her not to kick me out, and she just kept repeating over and over that they had already made the decision and there was no going back. I asked her if she had talked to my grandparents about this, and she said yes, that they were already aware and there was no problem, which turned out to be partly true because my grandparents obviously accepted me without thinking twice. But the way my mom presented it was as if they agreed with kicking me out, when the reality is they simply weren't going to leave me on the street. Those 2 weeks were the worst of my life up to that point. I packed all my stuff, while my mom went on with her normal life like nothing was happening, like she wasn't destroying me inside. And Brian acted like I was invisible, literally didn't say a word to me, not even once during those 2 weeks. The day I left, my grandparents came to pick me up in their old truck, a 2005 Ford that still runs to this day. And while they loaded my boxes and bags, my mom stood at the door of the house with one hand on her pregnant belly. She didn't even help me load anything or give me a goodbye hug, just waved at me and closed the door. My grandfather, who's normally a very calm man and doesn't get into drama, was furious. I could see it on his face as he drove. He had his hands tight on the steering wheel and his jaw clenched, but he didn't say anything in front of me because I guess he didn't want to make me feel worse than I already felt. My grandmother, on the other hand, did speak. She told me this had nothing to do with me, that it wasn't my fault, that my mom was making a terrible mistake, and that someday she was going to regret it. But honestly, at that moment, her words didn't console me at all, because all I could think about was that my own mother had chosen them over me, had decided that her new kids were more important than me. Living with my grandparents was, honestly, the best thing that could have happened to me in the middle of that horrible situation. They gave me my own room, fully integrated me into their routine, supported me emotionally in ways I didn't even know I needed at that moment. My grandmother cooked my favorite meals. My grandfather helped me with math homework that I always struggled with, and both made sure I finished high school without all this shit affecting my grades. But that doesn't mean I wasn't destroyed inside. Because I was. I spent nights awake wondering what I had done wrong, why I wasn't enough for my mom, why Brian had been more important than me, why the twins deserved a home and I didn't. During the rest of my senior year, I basically had no contact with my mom. She never called me, never came to visit me, never asked how I was or if I needed anything. It was like she had erased my existence from her life. When I graduated from high school, my grandparents went to my graduation ceremony. My aunt also went. She's always been a sweetheart, honestly. But my mom didn't show up. I didn't even send a congratulations message. The twins had already been born by then. They were like 4 or 5 months old, and I didn't even know them. Didn't know their names or anything. Part of me wanted to meet them because they were my brothers, technically, but a bigger part of me was so angry and hurt that I didn't want anything to do with them, or with my mom, or with Brian, or with that whole family that had rejected me. I decided I was going to college, got several scholarships for my good grades, and my aunt offered to co-sign the student loans I needed to cover what the scholarships didn't reach, which was amazing of her because she was basically risking her credit for me. College was tough, I'm not gonna lie. I worked part-time at a Starbucks to have money for basic things, studied like crazy to keep my scholarships, and lived in a tiny apartment. I shared with 2 roommates, who were a mess, but at least paid their part of the rent on time. I never asked my mom for money. Not once. Even when I was eating instant ramen for the 3rd time in a week because I couldn't afford more, because my pride wouldn't let me. And besides, I knew she wasn't going to give it to me anyway. My grandparents helped me when they could. They'd send me $50 or $100 every now and then so I could buy decent food, and my aunt also helped me occasionally. But in general, I was alone, building my life from scratch without the support of the person who was supposed to be there for me unconditionally. I graduated from college 4 years later. It was a huge achievement for me. Like really huge, because I had done it completely alone, without help from my mom, and I felt like I was proving to the world, and to her too, although she'd never admit it, that she hadn't destroyed me, that I could get ahead without her. I got an entry-level job at a real estate company. I didn't earn much at first. Basically lived paycheck to paycheck, paying my student loans and my rent and my basic expenses. But it was my life, you know what I mean? Nobody had handed it to me. Nobody had opened doors for me. I had kicked those doors down until they fell and had built something from nothing. I was still living with roommates because I couldn't afford my own place, but I was okay. I was progressing, and that was what mattered. Like 2 years passed working at that company. They promoted me once, then again, and suddenly I was earning a decent salary. I wasn't rich or anything, but I wasn't living day to day anymore. I had savings. I could buy new clothes without feeling guilty. I could go out to dinner with friends without having to count every dollar. I moved into my own apartment, a small studio but completely mine, and honestly, I felt proud of myself. Felt like I had finally reached a place of stability after years of constant struggle. And then, as if the universe had decided things were going too well for me, my mom showed up out of nowhere. I hadn't seen her in person in like 6 or 7 years. Hadn't talked to her practically at all in all that time except for a couple of very short and cold messages at Christmas. And suddenly she knocks on my door on a Saturday afternoon. I opened the door, and there she was. She looked older, obviously, had more gray hair, more wrinkles, but it was her, no doubt. My first reaction was to close the door in her face, but surprise paralyzed me, and before I could react, she was already talking. She said hi like nothing. Like half a decade hadn't passed without seeing each other. Like she hadn't abandoned me when I needed her most. And she asked if she could come in because she needed to talk to me about something important. Let me tell you that my whole body was screaming at me to tell her no, to tell her to fuck off and close the door. But a part of me, that stupid part that still held hope that maybe she was coming to apologize, to acknowledge what she had done, to try to repair our relationship, opened the door and let her in. She sat on my couch and started talking about her life like I was her lifelong friend. Told me the twins were now 15 years old. Obviously, I knew how to do the math. That they were good students. That they were starting to visit colleges. And I sat there thinking, did she really come all the way? Here just to brag about how well she's doing with her other kids? But then came the real reason for her visit, and when I heard it, I wanted to throw up. Turns out Brian had lost his construction business a few years back, that they had been struggling financially, that they didn't have savings for the twins' college, and that she had heard. She didn't tell me from whom, but I assume from my grandparents or my aunt, that I was making good money and had a good job. So she had come to ask me, no, more like demand from me, to help pay for my half-siblings' college. She literally told me, they're your family. You have an obligation to help them. As if that word, family, meant anything coming from her. As if she hadn't shown me years ago that to her I wasn't family when things got tough. I laughed. Honestly, I laughed in her face. A bitter laugh, full of rage. And I told her, are you serious? You come after all these years, without having bothered to know if I was alive or dead, without having supported me in absolutely anything, and you expect me to give you money? I told her no, that absolutely not, that she had made her decision when she kicked me out of her house and now she had to live with the consequences of that decision. She got furious, started screaming that I was selfish, that I was being vindictive, that the twins weren't to blame for what had happened between us. And technically she was right about that last part, but that didn't change the fact that it wasn't my responsibility to fix her financial problems. I told her to leave, literally pointed at the door and told her get out of my house now, and she kept screaming as she walked toward the door, told me I was going to regret it, that someday I was going to need something from her and she wasn't going to help me. And I just thought, really? Does she really think that someday I'm going to need something from her after all this? I closed the door with the lock and stood there shaking. I don't know if from rage, or relief or sadness, probably a mix of all three. And I realized I had been holding my breath. I cried that night, cried a lot, not for her but for the mother I never had, for the relationship we could never have, for all the time and emotional energy I had wasted wishing things were different. I thought that was going to be it, that she was going to disappear from my life again and I could move on. But oh no, this was just beginning. She started sending me emails, like 2 or 3 per week, all with the same theme, that I reconsider my decision, that the twins needed me, that it was my duty as an older sister to help them. Pure textbook guilt-tripping. I blocked her email, then she started calling my cell phone, left really long voicemails crying and begging, and then in the next voicemail she was furious and insulting me. It was like a constant emotional roller coaster. I blocked her number, and guess what she did? She showed up at my work. She literally showed up at the real estate office where I work, asked for me at reception, and when the receptionist told her I was in a meeting with a client, she started screaming in the lobby that I was her daughter and she needed to talk to me urgently. My boss had to come out to see what was going on. It was super embarrassing. They had to call security to escort her out of the building, and when she finally left, she made a whole scene worthy of a reality show. Security called the police. She left before they arrived, but a report was filed. And I had to explain the whole situation to my boss, who fortunately was super understanding, but it was still humiliating to have to air my personal life at work. The emails kept coming, now from new addresses she created every time I blocked the previous one. Text messages also kept coming from different numbers, and she started showing up at my apartment, knocked on the door at random hours, sometimes at 7 in the morning, sometimes at 10 at night, and stayed there screaming for several minutes until some neighbor told her to shut up or threatened to call the police. I talked to the building manager, explained the situation to him, showed him pictures of her so he'd recognize her, and he told me that if she showed up again, he was going to call the police immediately, but that didn't stop her. One night I was coming home from work. It was like 8 at night. I was tired and hungry and just wanted to get into my apartment and forget about the world, and there she was, waiting for me in the hallway in front of my door. I tried to turn around and go down the stairs to ask the manager to call the police, but she grabbed my arm, literally grabbed me hard and pulled me, and started screaming about why I was avoiding her, that she needed to talk to me, that the twins depended on me. I tried to break free and she pushed me against the wall. She didn't cause me serious physical harm, but I got scared. She had never been violent with me before, and suddenly, my The neighbor from the apartment next door opened his door hearing the commotion and told her to let me go or he was going to call the police. My mom let me go and ran down the stairs, and my neighbor actually called the police, gave them a description of her, told them what had happened. When the police arrived, I was sitting on the hallway floor, still shaking. I made an official report, showed them all the emails and text messages I had been saving as evidence, told them about the incident at my work, and they told me I had enough to request a restraining order. The next day, I went to court, filled out all the necessary paperwork, had a hearing like 2 weeks later where I presented all my evidence, and the judge granted me the restraining order. My mom didn't even show up to the hearing to defend herself or give her version of events. I thought that was going to be enough. But things got worse. A week after she was notified about the restraining order, she showed up at my apartment. Again, this time, earlier in the morning, like at 6, I was still in my pajamas, and started pounding on the door with her fists, screaming that it was an unfair order, that I couldn't do this, that her children needed me. I called the police immediately, yelled through the door that they were already on the way. But she didn't leave, kept pounding and screaming, and when I finally heard the sirens outside, she started kicking my door, literally kicking, as if she wanted to knock it down. The police came up and found her still there, trying to force my door, completely out of control, and they had to handcuff her because she was so hysterical she wouldn't cooperate. They arrested her for violating the restraining order and for attempted assault or something like that. I don't remember the exact legal term, and took her in the patrol car. I stayed there with 2 officers taking my statement. I was crying, couldn't stop shaking, and one of the officers recommended I consider moving to an address she didn't know, because clearly she wasn't going to stop. But moving meant expenses. I hadn't planned, and besides, why did I have to be the one to move? Why did I have to alter my life because of her craziness? She spent the night in jail, got out the next day after posting bail or whatever they had to do, and I honestly expected that would have scared her enough to stop harassing me. But no. 2 days later, I received an email from another new address telling me that all of this was my fault, that I had forced her to reach these extremes, that if only I had agreed to help the twins, none of this would have happened. I forwarded the email to the police. They added it to my case, and the officer who had been handling my situation told me she was probably going to end up with more serious charges if she kept violating the order. And then, like 3 weeks after the arrest, she showed up again at my apartment, this time in the afternoon. I was working from home that day, and when I heard the knocking on my door, I called the police immediately, without even looking through the peephole, because I already knew who it was. She started screaming again, but this time, what she was screaming was different. She was saying that I had ruined her life, that because of me, Brian was going to leave her, that the twins were ashamed of her, that everything was my fault, and I stood there on the other side of the door, listening to her blame me for all her horrible decisions, for all the consequences of her own actions. When the police arrived this time, she didn't leave quietly, tried to resist, started pushing them and screaming that they were abusers, that they were on the side of an ungrateful and horrible daughter, and finally they had to practically drag her down the stairs while she kept screaming. My neighbor, the same one who had called the police the previous time, came out of his apartment and asked me if I was okay. Offered to let me stay at his place. If I was afraid to? Be alone. He was very kind, honestly. But I told him I was fine, although the truth is I wasn't. I was terrified she'd come back again, that next time she'd manage to knock down my door, that things would escalate even more. This time they arrested her again. But now the charges were more serious because she had violated the restraining order multiple times, and the prosecutor on the case contacted me to tell me I was probably going to have to testify in a trial eventually. The idea of having to see her again, of having to sit in a courtroom and recount this whole nightmare in front of her and in front of strangers, made me nauseous. But at the same time, I wanted her to pay for what she had done. I wanted her to face real consequences for the first time in her life. Meanwhile, I was living with a level of constant anxiety I had never experienced before. Every noise in the hallway made me jump. Every time I saw an unfamiliar car parked near my building, I got nervous. I slept with my phone next to my bed ready to call 911 at any moment. My grandparents called me almost every day to see how I was. My grandmother was devastated by all this, told me she never imagined her own daughter was capable of something like this, and I could hear in her voice how guilty she felt, even though it obviously wasn't her fault at all. My grandfather, on the other hand, was furious, told me that if my mom dared to show up near them, he was going to chase her away with a broom, And coming from an almost 80-year-old man who's normally the most peaceful person in the world, that means a lot. My aunt also called me, offered me money to pay for an apartment somewhere else if I decided to move, told me I could stay with her temporarily if I needed to, basically offered me all her unconditional support, and that made me cry with gratitude because at least I had some people in my corner. Finally, after like 2 more months of all this hell, my mom was sentenced to 6 months in jail for violation of the restraining order and other related charges. It's not much time, honestly, but at least it's something. And when she gets out, the restraining order extends for another 3 years. The prosecutor told me that if she violates it again after getting out, the charges are going to be even more serious, possibly up to a year or more in prison. Honestly, I don't know how I feel about it. Part of me feels relief that there's finally going to be a period of time where I know she can't harass me. But another part of me is sad because despite everything she did to me, she's still my mom, you know? And it's hard to reconcile the mom I remember from my childhood, the one who read me bedtime stories and made me breakfast on Sundays, with this person who has been terrorizing me for months. I decided to move anyway, even with her in prison, because that apartment no longer feels safe. It has too many bad memories associated with this whole situation, and I need a fresh start in a place where she can't find me when she gets out. My grandparents and my aunt are helping me with the move. I found a place in a different part of the city, further from where she lives and closer to my work, which is convenient. I'm not going to give my new address to anyone except my grandparents and my aunt, not even going to give it to my closest friends at first, just as a precaution, because you never know how she might get information. What hurts me most about this whole situation, beyond the harassment and the fear and the violence, is realizing that the relationship I always wanted to have with my mom is never going to exist. For years, even after she kicked me out, there was a part of me that fantasized that someday she'd come looking for me to apologize, to acknowledge she had made a terrible mistake, to try to rebuild our relationship. But now I know that's never going to happen. The mom I wanted to have, the mom I needed to have, simply doesn't exist. And probably never existed. Or if she existed, she died years ago when she decided her new kids were more important than me. And that's something I'm going to have to process in therapy for a long time, I guess, because it's not something you get over overnight. The twins, my half-siblings I've never met, are going to turn 16 soon, the same age I was when they kicked me out. And I wonder if my mom ever thinks about that irony. If she ever realizes she's in prison for harassing me while her other children are entering the same age, at which she decided I no longer deserved a home. I don't know anything about them, don't know if they know this whole story, don't know if my mom lied to them about me or told them some distorted version of the facts. And honestly, I don't want to know because it's not my problem. They have their life and I have mine, and although a small part of me is curious to meet them someday, the bigger and saner part knows it's better to maintain that distance. My boss at work has been incredibly understanding during all this. Let me work from home during the worst weeks of the harassment, didn't ask me uncomfortable questions about the details, just supported me and assured me my job was safe and I could take the time I needed to deal with the situation. And that meant a lot to me because in the middle of all this chaos, at least I knew my career wasn't in danger. Some of my coworkers know what happened. Not all the details, but enough to understand why I was so stressed and distracted during those months. And several have offered me their support in different ways, from inviting me for coffee to clear my head to simply asking how I am from time to time, and those small gestures of kindness have been more important than they probably imagine. Now I'm in my new apartment, still unpacking boxes, still getting used to this new space. And for the first time in months, I feel like I can breathe without that constant weight on my chest. I don't know what's going to happen when my mom gets out of prison in 6 months. If she's going to try to find me again, or if she'll finally understand she needs to leave me alone. But for now, I have a plan. I have my extended restraining order. I have the detective's number who handled my case saved in my phone. And I have the support of the people who really matter in my life. The therapist I started seeing like 3 months ago tells me I'm doing important work. By establishing boundaries. By protecting myself. By not letting myself be manipulated by guilt. And although some days it's harder to believe it than others, I know she's right. Sometimes I think about what my life would be like if my mom had never kicked me out when I was 16, if she had found a way for all of us to live together, if she had prioritized keeping her family united instead of fragmenting it. And it's strange because I can't decide if my life would be better or worse. On one hand, I wouldn't have gone through all that pain and rejection, wouldn't have had to fight so hard to get ahead, wouldn't be dealing with all this trauma I'm probably going to carry for the rest of my life. But on the other hand, everything I went through made me stronger, more independent, more resilient, taught me that I can count on myself when nobody else is there, and showed me who the people are that are really worthwhile in my life. So I guess I wouldn't change anything even if I could, because this is what made me who I am now. Last week, my grandparents came to help me finish setting up my new apartment. My grandmother brought food like she always does, made enough to last me several days, and my grandfather installed new locks on my door, really secure ones, that according to him, not even with a crowbar could they force. And as I watched them work on my new home, making it safe for me, making sure I was okay, I realized again that they are my true family. Not my mom who gave birth to me, but who abandoned me when things got tough. But these people who chose to be there for me without conditions, without expectations, without ulterior motives. My grandmother hugged me before leaving and told me, "You're going to be okay, Mija. You're stronger than you think," and I want to believe her. I really want to believe her, because the alternative is to keep living in fear, and that's just no way to live.